Our world feels stable, lights on, planes flying, cities alive, but under the surface, it's breaking. Earthquakes are clustering in ways science can't explain. The sun is firing storms that can wipe out satellites and power grids. Earth's magnetic shield is shifting faster than expected. And now, a comet from interstellar space, 3I Atlas, has entered the system, dragging a vast plasma tail through the currents that connect us to the sun. Coincidence? Or are these cycles converging into something far greater? Civilizations don't collapse from one event. They fall when forces collide. Today, our systems are so fragile that one failure can trigger many. Don't wait until after the reset to ask what happened. Follow along now, let me know your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and like this video. Thank you for embarking on this journey with me. The clock is already ticking. We live beneath a sky that looks calm, constant, and eternal. Each morning the sun rises, light scatters through the atmosphere, and we go about our lives assuming the heavens above are nothing more than a backdrop. Yet the reality is far stranger. Space is not empty, and the sun is not simply a ball of fire hanging in the void. Above our heads lies a restless system, an ocean of energy that never sleeps. The sun breathes. It expands and contracts in waves of magnetism. It flares with sudden outbursts, and it hurls billions of tons of charged particles across the solar system. These streams, invisible to the human eye, travel at breathtaking speeds and carry with them power we can scarcely imagine. Earth is constantly bathed in this solar wind, its currents pressing against our magnetic field like tides against the shore. Most of the time, the interaction is subtle. The solar wind bends around Earth, diverted by the magnetic shield that surrounds us. This field, generated deep within the molten iron of our planet's core, acts like an invisible guardian. Without it, the solar wind would strip away our atmosphere, burn the surface, and erase the conditions that make life possible. But this guardian is not invincible. When the sun grows restless, when it opens vast holes in its magnetic surface or erupts with flares, the pressure on Earth's magnetic field becomes overwhelming. The field stretches, contorts, and sometimes cracks. Streams of charged particles slip through the gaps, funneling into the atmosphere near the poles. There they collide with molecules of oxygen and nitrogen, releasing bursts of light, the shimmering curtains we call the aurora. To most, these lights are a spectacle, a natural wonder admired in silence. Yet to those who study them, the auroras are a warning. They mark the moments when solar energy bypasses Earth's defences and touches the planet directly. Each burst carries the potential to disrupt. Satellites blink out of control, navigation signals distort, power grids overload. Entire regions can be thrown into darkness by storms no human eye can see. This connection between Sun and Earth is no longer theoretical. In 1989, a powerful solar storm struck the magnetic field with enough force to collapse the power grid of Quebec, leaving millions without electricity in an instant. In 2003, another storm forced airlines to divert flights, disabled satellites, and nearly crippled parts of Europe's energy system. These events were previews, glimpses of what a truly massive storm could unleash. Scientists warn that if a storm on the scale of the 1859 Carrington event were to occur today, modern society would be brought to its knees. Communications, banking, navigation, transportation, even clean water delivery all rely on the fragile networks that thread our world together. A single geomagnetic superstorm could unravel them within hours, and yet the danger may not stop at the surface. For decades, researchers have debated whether solar storms and geomagnetic shifts have influence deeper than our atmosphere. When the magnetosphere buckles, immense electric currents are driven through Earth itself. These currents can flow along pipelines, through fault lines, even across entire continents. Could such disturbances nudge the delicate balance of stresses beneath our feet? Could the rhythms of the sun echo through the crust of the Earth, triggering quakes or amplifying seismic swarms? Mainstream science approaches this question cautiously. Earthquakes, we are told, are driven by tectonic plates grinding together, powered by the slow churning of the mantle. Solar storms, meanwhile, are studied as an atmospheric and technological threat. Two separate domains. Yet history is filled with unsettling coincidences. Times when great solar disturbances and great earthquakes appeared close together, separated by hours or days. Each could be dismissed as chance, but patterns have a way of nagging at human curiosity. The idea is not new. Centuries ago, chroniclers noted strange lights in the skies before devastating earthquakes. Cultures wove myths of heavenly fire shaking the ground, of gods in the sky stirring the earth below. These stories were long regarded as superstition, the primitive imagination trying to explain disaster. But now, as our instruments stretch from satellites in orbit to sensors buried deep in rock, the possibility emerges that the ancients were not imagining, but observing, that the sky and the ground are linked in ways we are only beginning to understand. The sun itself is entering a new cycle of intensity. Its magnetic activity waxes and wanes in roughly 11-year rhythms, and as the cycle peaks, storms grow more frequent, more violent, more unpredictable. Sunspots multiply, each one a reservoir of twisted magnetism. When they release, they can launch solar flares brighter than 1 billion nuclear bombs and hurl coronal mass ejections that dwarf the Earth. These are not rare anomalies. They are part of the sun's heartbeat, and we are now entering the phase where that heartbeat quickens. Already the signs are clear. Geomagnetic storms are striking with increasing strength. Auroras are being seen farther south than they have in decades. Communications disruptions are becoming routine. To the casual observer, these may appear as isolated events, but to those watching closely, they are tremors before a larger quake, hints that the solar system is shifting into a more volatile state. What makes this moment unusual is not only the sun's rising power, but the convergence of factors. Earth's magnetic field itself is weakening. Measurements show that over the last century, the shield has been losing strength, particularly over a region known as the South Atlantic Anomaly. Satellites passing through this zone are vulnerable to damage, and the weakening suggests that Earth may be entering a period of magnetic upheaval. Some researchers even whisper of the possibility of a pole reversal, a process that has happened before in geological history, but never during human civilization. If the field continues to falter just as the sun surges, the result could be exposure unlike anything in recorded memory. The sky above is awakening. What appears serene is in truth alive with storms and currents that could redefine life on the ground. Every flicker of aurora, every burst of radio static, every unexplained outage is part of a larger story. Earth is not separate from the cosmos. It is woven into a system, tethered to a star whose moods shape the conditions of our world. We find ourselves at the beginning of that story now. The question is not whether the sun will grow violent. It will. The question is whether Earth can endure what follows. The awakening sky is not an abstract warning, not a distant possibility. It is a present reality, one we are only beginning to grasp. And as we stand beneath it, looking up at the calm blue dome of day or the quiet stars at night, we must remember, silence does not mean safety. The energy of the universe moves whether we notice it or not, and sometimes its movements align in ways that change everything. The countdown begins, not in the ground beneath us, but in the skies above. Beneath our feet lies a world of immense pressure, hidden and relentless. We walk on solid ground and assume stability, yet the crust of Earth is neither solid nor still. It is fractured into vast slabs, tectonic plates that grind, collide, and slip past one another, their boundaries stretching thousands of miles. These plates float on a mantle of rock so hot it moves like slow liquid. The result is a planet in constant motion. its stability an illusion maintained only as long as tension does not break. Every moment forces are building. Along fault lines, rocks bend and strain under unimaginable pressure. Sometimes they hold for centuries, sometimes for only decades, but sooner or later they reach their limit. The rock snaps and the ground convulses. What we feel as an earthquake is the sudden release of energy that has been silently accumulating, the planet exhaling in violent bursts. Earthquakes can last only seconds, but in that time they can reshape entire regions. Mountains crack, valleys sink, coastlines shift. Entire cities have been reduced to rubble by a tremor lasting less than a minute. The sheer unpredictability of these events is what makes them so terrifying. Scientists can map fault lines, measure strain, and calculate probabilities, but the exact moment of release remains hidden. The Earth moves when it chooses, not when we are ready. History reminds us of this power again and again. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake, a rupture more than 1,000 miles long, unleashed a tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands across multiple countries. In 2011, Japan experienced a similar disaster as the ground shifted violently offshore, triggering a wave that devastated the coast and led to a nuclear crisis. These are not rare anomalies, but part of a recurring cycle of destruction written into the geology of our world, and yet sometimes the timing of these quakes seems uncanny. Clusters occur as though the planet were responding to invisible rhythms, bursts of seismic unrest appearing across distant regions with unsettling synchronicity. While traditional science explains these as the statistical quirks of a restless planet, others see a deeper pattern. They ask whether something beyond Earth might sometimes act as a trigger, an external spark that forces a fault already near breaking to finally give way. There is reason to wonder. The Earth is not an isolated system. It is part of a web of forces stretching from the sun to the stars. We know that the moon's gravity pulls at our oceans, raising tides that sweep across the globe twice each day. If a nearby body can move entire seas, could the interplay of cosmic energies exert influence on the crust itself? Some researchers have suggested that solar storms, by driving immense electrical currents into Earth's surface, might subtly alter stress along certain faults. Others speculate that planetary alignments, though weak in direct gravity, could synchronize or amplify forces in ways we do not yet grasp. For now, these remain open questions, on the edge between established science and speculative inquiry. What cannot be denied is the fact that Earth's seismic activity and solar disturbances sometimes occur in unnerving proximity. When space weather surges and the ground below stirs, we are left to wonder whether coincidence alone explains the overlap. But even without cosmic connections, the restless ground is a danger of its own making. Nearly half of the world's population now lives in urban areas, many of them built directly atop fault zones. Megacities rise where plates meet, their skylines casting shadows across fragile foundations. The more humanity builds upward and outward, the more lives are placed in the path of seismic destruction. A quake that would once have shattered an uninhabited stretch of land now threatens millions. What makes the risk even greater is our dependence on fragile networks. Power grids, pipelines, communication lines, all stretch across regions that could be severed in seconds. An earthquake is not only a local disaster but a global ripple, capable of disrupting supply chains and destabilizing entire economies. When the ground shifts, the systems of civilization shift with it. Consider the quiet irony. We build as though the ground is stable, yet all the while it is a battlefield of forces we barely comprehend. The crust beneath us is scarred with ancient faults, scars that have not healed but remain under pressure. At any moment, one of them could awaken, and the truth is that even the best instruments cannot provide certainty. We live in the tension between what is possible to measure and what is impossible to predict. There are, however, signs that earthquakes may not always be completely without warning. Strange lights in the sky, low-frequency sounds, unusual behaviour in animals, these phenomena have been reported for centuries. Modern science approaches them skeptically, but some researchers investigate whether electromagnetic disturbances or ground emissions might precede major quakes. If so, then perhaps the line between Earth's seismic unrest and the cosmic environment above is thinner than we imagine. The Earth is restless, and that restlessness is accelerating in ways we do not yet understand. Data suggests that the frequency of large quakes fluctuates over decades, possibly tied to cycles deep within the mantle or even to solar influences. When multiple systems overlap, solar storms above, seismic pressure below, the results could be catastrophic. This is where the question sharpens. Are we living through a period of unusual convergence? Are the cycles of ski and ground drawing together into a moment where their energies collide? If so, then our fragile civilization stands on the edge of forces too vast to control. For now, all we can do is watch the ground, measure its tremors, and wait for the next rupture. But deep down, we sense that Earth's restlessness is not random. It is part of a larger story, one that includes the sun, the stars, and perhaps visitors from even further beyond. The surface of our planet may appear steady, but it is not the final authority. Earth is a participant in a cosmic dialogue, its crust responding to pressures both internal and external. And as we turn from the restless sky to the restless ground, the same truth echoes. Silence does not mean safety. Energy is always building, whether above or below, waiting for its release. The next rupture may already be written. We simply do not yet know the hour. The sun is restless, the earth beneath us is straining, and into this volatile balance another presence moves. Already known to our audience, already tracked, already discussed. 3i Atlas does not need an introduction here. It is simply part of the stage now, a colossal actor moving silently through the same currents that bind the sun and earth. What matters is not what it is, but what it does by being here at this moment. Such timing is extraordinary. Solar cycle 25 is approaching its peak, bringing with it a rapid uptick in storms, flares, and coronal mass ejections. The magnetosphere, weakened in parts and riddled with anomalies, bends under the weight of this constant assault. Meanwhile, seismic stress along fault zones is mounting, with clusters of earthquakes occurring in unnerving succession. Each of these systems, the solar, the terrestrial, and the interstellar, would be significant on its own. Together they suggest a convergence that feels more like an alignment of forces than mere coincidence. This collision here is not physical. 3i Atlas will not strike Earth, and it poses no direct impact threat. The collision is electromagnetic. Imagine three different rivers flowing into one another: the solar wind, the plasma environment of 3i Atlas, and the magnetic shield of Earth. Each river has its own currents, its own turbulence, its own hidden depths. Where they meet, patterns emerge that cannot be predicted by looking at any single river in isolation. The coma of 3i Atlas is vast beyond comprehension, charged with ionized particles. As the solar wind streams past it, magnetic fields twist, shock waves ripple, turbulence spreads. These disturbances are not neatly confined to one location. They ripple outward, altering the heliospheric environment that surrounds us all. Earth, orbiting within this environment, does not get to opt out. Our planet sits downstream, inside the same currents, its veil of magnetism reshaped by conditions unfolding millions of kilometers away. At the same time, the sun itself is in a state of agitation. Coronal holes fling high-speed streams across space. Solar flares crack open, releasing bursts of radiation. Each of these phenomena alone can hammer Earth's magnetic field, setting off geomagnetic storms that spark auroras and threaten technology. Now, as these storms interact with the shifting plasma of 3i Atlas, the currents no longer move in familiar patterns. Instead of steady flows, we may see eddies, surges, and disruptions that push Earth's defences into uncharted territory. This is where speculation enters. If geomagnetic disturbances can induce electric currents in the crust of the Earth, as we know they can, then what happens when those disturbances are amplified by turbulence spreading outward from the massive plasma environment of 3I Atlas? The possibility is that seismic systems already near failure could be nudged toward release, not caused outright, but tipped, like a glass on the edge of a table finally falling with the smallest vibration. Critics will call this coincidence hunting. After all, earthquakes occur constantly, and solar storms are frequent during cycle peaks. But dismissing the possibility outright ignores the fact that Earth is a participant in a system, not an island. The same currents that flow past 3I Atlas flow past us. The same electromagnetic storms that ripple through its coma ripple through our magnetosphere. If turbulence spreads across the system, we are inside that turbulence whether we acknowledge it or not. Think of the heliosphere as an enormous electrical circuit. The Sun is the power source, driving currents of charged particles outward. The planets are components in the circuit, each with its own magnetic field, atmosphere, and conductive layers. When an alien plasma environment like 3I Atlas enters this circuit, it is like adding a new component to a device. The flow of current changes, the balance shifts, and just as in electronics, those shifts can cascade unpredictably through the entire system. The scientific opportunity here is immense. Instruments across the globe and in orbit are recording data at every wavelength. Radio telescopes tracking emissions from ionized gas, X-ray observatories capturing high-energy interactions, and satellites mapping the magnetosphere's response in real time. For plasma physicists, this is a natural laboratory, unlike any we have ever witnessed. For seismologists, it is a chance to test theories that have long lingered at the edge of credibility. If electromagnetic storms can truly influence fault timing, then the coming months will reveal it. But the danger is not purely scientific. Humanity's infrastructure rests on the assumption of a relatively stable space environment. Satellites depend on predictable orbital conditions. Power grids are designed with tolerances based on past storms. Communications and navigation rely on signals that cut through the ionosphere. If the currents of the solar wind are reshaped by 3I Atlas, if turbulence amplifies the effects of geomagnetic storms, then those tolerances may no longer be enough. Blackouts, signal losses, and cascading failures could ripple outward just as the cosmic turbulence does. The unsettling part is that this is not theory in the distant future. It is happening now, in real time. Already we have seen auroras dancing farther south than expected, power grids straining under geomagnetic pressure, and seismic clusters emerging in regions where pressure was already high. Whether or not these events are causally linked, the perception of connection is undeniable, and perception shapes how we understand our place in the system. For centuries, humanity believed Earth was separate from the heavens, that the sky was a distant dome, and the ground beneath us was governed by its own rules. Now, evidence suggests otherwise. The cosmos is not distant, it is continuous. The Sun, the Earth, and 3I Atlas are not three unrelated entities. They are nodes in the same circuit, currents of the same river, voices in the same conversation. The question is no longer whether the stranger between stars matters. It does. The question is what its presence will reveal about the system we inhabit, and whether we are ready to accept the answers. If nothing unusual occurs, skeptics will claim victory. But if earthquakes cluster, if storms intensify, if our systems falter, then the triad of Sun, Earth, and 3I Atlas will have shown us a truth too large to ignore. This is the convergence, not a Hollywood script, not a myth, but a real-time experiment conducted by the universe itself. An experiment in which the variables are massive, the outcomes uncertain, and the laboratory is the solar system. And whether we are prepared or not, the results are coming, the currents are colliding, and Earth is caught in the middle. The story unfolding is not one of separate events, but of resonance. A solar storm alone is disruptive, An earthquake alone is devastating, and Three-Eye Atlas alone is a spectacle. Yet when all three systems pulse within the same window of time, the possibility emerges that they do not simply coexist, they may amplify one another. Resonance is the secret engine of the universe. It is why a singer's voice can shatter glass, why small pushes at the right moment can set a swing soaring, why tides rise and fall in rhythm with the moon. Energy becomes dangerous not merely when it is strong, but when it aligns. When cycles overlap, when peaks meet peaks, the effect is greater than the sum of its parts. Consider the sun. Its cycle of magnetic activity builds toward peaks of turbulence, throwing off flares and eruptions that buffet Earth's shield. Now consider the Earth. Its crust is threaded with faults under tension, silent but primed to release. And then add Three-Eye Atlas, a moving reservoir of plasma and gas, reshaping the currents of the heliosphere as it drifts through. Each system vibrates on its own. Together they form a triad. This triad is not mystical, it is physical. Charged particles from the Sun, distorted by the vast coma of Three-Eye Atlas, arrive at Earth already carrying turbulence. The magnetosphere strains under the impact, driving currents not only through the atmosphere but into the ground itself. Those currents, though invisible, are measurable, surging through pipelines, cables, and perhaps even faults under stress. To dismiss their potential influence is to ignore the basic principle of resonance. Small additions at the right frequency can unleash immense effects. Skeptics argue that this borders on pattern seeking. Earthquakes have always occurred, and solar storms are frequent. But history is filled with examples of clusters, of periods where multiple disasters converge within weeks or even days. To write them off as chance is easy. To ask whether they might share a hidden rhythm is harder and far more uncomfortable. The truth is that Earth has always lived within a cosmic web of forces. Our planet is not self-contained. It is part of a system where electromagnetic energy flows across millions of kilometers, where interstellar visitors reshape the space we inhabit, where solar storms reach into our ground and tug at the most basic structures of our world. We cannot separate the sky from the soil. They are bound. The resonance of three sharpens this truth. The Sun, Earth, and Three-Eye Atlas are not merely neighbours, they are participants in the same experiment. Their energies overlap in ways we're only beginning to measure. A flare on the Sun can shake our magnetosphere within hours. The shifting plasma of Three-Eye Atlas can distort those currents further, and the crust of the Earth, already restless, may feel the vibration as one more push against its fragile equilibrium. This does not mean that every storm will cause an earthquake, or that every quake is born in the Sun. But when cycles align, when solar storms surge, when Earth's faults are primed, when interstellar plasma spreads turbulence, the chance of resonance increases. And when resonance occurs, outcomes can leap beyond what statistics predict. The risk is not only geological, but civilizational. Our infrastructure has no buffer for cosmic convergence. Power grids collapse under geomagnetic currents. Satellites fail under solar radiation. Communications break down when the ionosphere is disturbed. Add to this the chaos of an earthquake. Roads destroyed, cities shaken, rescue efforts disrupted, and the system begins to fracture. The triad does not need to strike directly. It only needs to overlap long enough to overwhelm the delicate networks that hold civilization together. In this light, the presence of Three-Eye Atlas takes on a symbolic weight. It is not simply a comet passing through, but a reminder of how little control we truly have. The Sun rages when it will. The Earth moves when it must, and the interstellar stranger drifts in without warning, altering the currents we depend on. We live not as masters of the planet, but as participants in a resonance we cannot command. And so the triad stands, the sky above, the ground below, and the visitor between. Their cycles are independent, yet their energies overlap in this moment of history. Whether coincidence or convergence, the result is the same: a world on edge, a civilization exposed, a countdown unfolding. The resonance of 3 is not prophecy. It is a recognition of how the universe works, how forces combine, how cycles align, how energies amplify when they meet. And if this resonance grows stronger, then the reset we fear may not come from one catastrophe alone, but from the convergence of many. The stage is set, the currents are moving, and the triad has begun its song. Above the clouds and beyond the breathable air lies a shield most of us never think about. It is invisible, yet it defines whether Earth is habitable or not. This barrier, built of magnetic fields and electric currents, stretches far into space. Without it, radiation from the sun would tear away the atmosphere, oceans would vanish into the void, and life as we know it would never have taken root. Scientists call it the magnetosphere, but perhaps electric veil is a better term: thin, fragile, and easily disturbed. The veil is born deep within Earth's molten core, where rivers of liquid iron churn under immense pressure. This movement creates a planetary magnetic field that arcs outward in vast loops before being swept backward by the solar wind. On the side facing the sun, the veil is pressed inward like the surface of a balloon under constant pressure. On the far side, it trails into space for millions of kilometers, stretched into a long magnetic tail. It is not static, but constantly reshaping, bending and vibrating under the force of solar energy. Most of the time, the veil functions quietly. The steady solar wind glances off, deflected around our world like water around a stone in a stream. But the sun does not always behave. When it erupts, through solar flares or coronal mass ejections, billions of tons of charged plasma hurl outward. These storms crash into the veil with such force that the entire system ripples, compresses, and sometimes tears open. When this happens, charged particles funnel toward Earth's polar regions. There, they collide with the upper atmosphere, setting it alight with shimmering curtains of green and red. To most people, auroras are a spectacle, but to researchers they are warnings, proof that the veil has been pierced, that the storm outside has reached inside. Each aurora is a footprint of energy entering our system, a reminder that the veil is neither unbreakable nor permanent. What follows on the ground is less visible but no less real. As the magnetic field buckles, it drives electric currents into the crust of the planet. These geomagnetically induced currents are strong enough to surge through pipelines, transformers and power lines. Utilities have learned to monitor them carefully, because a single storm can fry entire electrical grids. The Great Blackout of March 1989, which plunged Quebec into darkness for 9 hours, was the result of such a current. That was a moderate storm by historical standards. A stronger one could collapse infrastructure across continents. But the consequences may go deeper still. The crust of Earth is not a uniform block. It is laced with faults under stress, reservoirs of fluid, and zones of conductivity. Induced currents, invisible but measurable, snake through these pathways, following the least resistance. And here speculation begins. Could these currents alter the conditions along a fault line already near failure? Could they change groundwater pressure, weaken rock bonds, or tip the balance so that a quake scheduled by nature for weeks or months later is instead released today? Mainstream geophysics treats this with skepticism, pointing out that the total energy of a major earthquake dwarfs anything space weather could provide. Yet energy is not the point. Timing is. A glass balanced on the edge of a table requires almost no energy to fall, just the smallest nudge. Tides from the moon, though mechanically tiny, have been shown to trigger quakes in stressed regions. If gravity's subtle pull can advance an earthquake by hours or days, why not electromagnetic currents threading through conductive rock? Recent events give weight to the question. In September 2025, a strong geomagnetic storm surged through Earth's magnetosphere. recorded at G3 levels, powerful enough to cause auroras far south of their usual range and disrupt aviation communications. Just days later, a magnitude 7.8 quake shook the Kamchatka Peninsula, itself still reeling from an earlier megathrust event in July. Officially, seismologists labelled it an aftershock, which it was. But the timing, so close to a geomagnetic storm of unusual intensity, raises uncomfortable questions. Coincidence? Possibly. Yet if this overlap is more than chance, then we may be seeing the outlines of a coupling between the electric veil above and the fractures below. Complicating matters is the state of the veil itself. Earth's magnetic field is not stable across the long arc of history. It waxes and wanes, drifts and reverses. The last full reversal occurred nearly 800,000 years ago, and evidence suggests we may be approaching another. Already the field has been weakening, particularly over the South Atlantic, where satellites regularly malfunction as radiation slips through. The veil is thinning, at least in patches, leaving Earth more vulnerable to the storms pouring outward from the Sun. This weakening comes at the worst possible time. Solar Cycle 25 is ramping up faster and stronger than forecasters predicted, unleashing streams of high-speed particles from coronal holes and flares. At the same time, the interstellar traveller 3I Atlas is injecting an alien plasma cloud into the solar wind, reshaping flows and magnetic turbulence. And beneath our feet, stress builds along faults in regions already primed for rupture. 3 systems, solar, terrestrial and interstellar, are converging on the same fragile veil. The imagery is hard to escape. Earth is like a fortress with a crumbling wall. Outside, waves of energy pound against it. Inside, the foundations of the fortress groan under their own weight. If the wall holds, life continues. If it falters, the cascade of consequences may ripple from orbiting satellites to the deepest layers of the crust. Even if the veil does not collapse, its fluctuations alone carry risks. A strong enough storm could leave nations without power, cripple navigation, or destroy satellites critical to weather forecasts and defense systems. The global economy depends on digital timing synchronized by GPS satellites, each of which relies on the stability of the ionosphere. Shake the veil, and the modern world shakes with it. And so the veil becomes the center of the story. It is the place where currents from the Sun, turbulence from 3I Atlas, and stresses from Earth itself intersect. It is a crossroads of forces, visible only in the dancing lights of auroras or the flicker of a power grid, but decisive in shaping the countdown we now face. Some see these ideas as fringe, but even cautious science cannot ignore the evidence forever. We already know that small external triggers can influence earthquake timing. We already know that geomagnetic currents can penetrate deep into the crust, and we already know that Earth's magnetic field is weakening at the same time solar activity is intensifying. These are not theories, they are facts. The only question is whether their convergence in this moment represents coincidence, or something much larger. The electric veil is not invulnerable. It bends, it tears, and it is thinning. As the Sun rages, as 3I Atlas moves through the heliosphere, as Earth's crust strains, all eyes turn to this invisible shield. For if it fails, or even falters, the reset may not come from one domain alone, but from the resonance of all 3. Civilizations rise with the belief that the world is stable. The ground beneath their feet appears solid, the skies above seem eternal, and time itself feels predictable. Yet history tells another story. Sudden breaks, violent upheavals, and moments when the heavens and earth appear to move together in a terrifying dance. And when the survivors of those times recorded their experiences, they did not write in the language of science, they wrote in myth. Look closely at the world's oldest stories and patterns emerge. Ancient Chinese chronicles describe dragons of fire streaking across the sky before devastating earthquakes. In South America, legends tell of the heavens shimmering with light before the ground split open. Indigenous oral traditions in North America speak of thunderous booms from the air, followed by waves swallowing entire coastlines. These accounts, separated by oceans and centuries, repeat the same sequence: lights above, convulsions below, chaos in between. To modern ears, these sound like superstition. But strip away the symbolic language and the echoes are unmistakable. Auroral displays, skyfire, thunder from no storm, all phenomena associated with geomagnetic disturbances. And those disturbances, we now know, can drive currents through the Earth, possibly influencing the timing of seismic release. Were these ancient myths simply confused memories of cosmic events, or were they warnings encoded in story? Consider the fall of civilizations that seemed unstoppable in their time. The Akkadian Empire, 4,000 years ago, collapsed amid droughts, quakes, and strange atmospheric changes. The Mayan cities of the Classic period declined during centuries of climate instability and earth-shaking events. Even the Roman Empire, at its height, was battered by plagues and natural disasters that weakened its foundations. Archaeology often finds layers of sudden destruction, walls toppled, fires sweeping through, entire urban centres abandoned overnight. The people who lived through these moments may not have had satellites or seismographs, but they had eyes. They saw the sky grow restless as the Earth convulsed. Even in recorded history, the pairing of celestial and seismic events is unsettling. In 1859, just as the Carrington solar storm set telegraph wires ablaze, reports of earthquake swarms came from multiple regions. In 1908, the Tunguska explosion flattened forests in Siberia under a skyfire event still not fully explained. Some scientists believe it was a cometary fragment. 2 days later, seismic disturbances were reported across Eurasia. Are these mere coincidences, or fragments of a forgotten pattern linking cosmic and terrestrial upheaval? The challenge is separating myth from metaphor. Ancient peoples lacked our scientific framework, so they told their truths in symbols. Dragons, gods, skyfire, and floods. All were their way of explaining forces too vast to control. Yet when those symbols align with what we now know about geomagnetic storms, auroras, and seismic activity, the question arises: were these stories cultural inventions or cultural survival guides? Take, for example, the recurring motif of the world reset. Nearly every culture has a story of a great flood, a fire from the sky, or a shaking of the earth that destroyed an earlier age. The Bible speaks of a deluge, the Greeks of cataclysms sent by Zeus, the Hindus of cycles of destruction and renewal. In Andean tradition, entire worlds were said to have ended in earthquakes before new ones were born. Scholars interpret these as allegory, but what if they were memories of real cycles, periods when the veil faltered, the sun surged, and Earth's crust gave way in clusters of catastrophe? Modern science is catching up to what myth has whispered for millennia. The sun, earth, and heavens are not separate stories. They interact, sometimes violently. Ice cores reveal sudden spikes in cosmic radiation preserved in the chemistry of polar layers. Tree rings show evidence of massive solar storms centuries ago, storms strong enough to leave lasting imprints on Earth's environment. Geological strata preserve not just the scars of quakes and eruptions, but evidence that many occurred in clusters, as though triggered by something greater than local tectonics. And then there is the unsettling fact that our own time bears a resemblance to those described in legend. The magnetic field weakens, the sun intensifies, seismic clusters grow, and above us, an interstellar wanderer with a plasma halo rivals the sun in scale. To ancient chroniclers, this alignment would have been read as an omen, a sign that the cycle was beginning again. Today, we call it coincidence, or, more cautiously, convergence. Whether omen or accident, the result is the same: fragility. Our ancestors lived closer to the land and sky, and their stories reflect their dependence on forces beyond their control. We, with our satellites and skyscrapers, imagine ourselves immune, yet our networks are more delicate than theirs ever were. A geomagnetic storm that disrupted an empire of stone roads and aqueducts would, in our world, collapse banking systems, erase communications, and leave cities in chaos. We're not stronger, we're more vulnerable. The forgotten warnings matter because they remind us that humanity has been here before, staring at the sky while the ground convulsed. They remind us that cycles of catastrophe are not imaginary, but woven into the history of the planet. And they challenge us to see beyond coincidence, to recognize resonance when it appears. Perhaps myths are not predictions, but memories, records of what happens when the veil is pierced, when the sun roars, when the earth shifts, and when strangers from beyond drift through the solar system. If so, then our ancestors are whispering to us still, urging us not to mistake silence for safety. The question is whether we will listen, or whether we will, like civilizations before us, dismiss the warnings until the cycle turns and we are written into myth ourselves. Night over a modern city glows not with stars but with the pulse of power grids, satellites and data streams. Beneath those lights lies a hidden truth. Our world is stitched together by threads so fine that a single jolt can unravel them. Civilization no longer rests on stone and soil. It balances on wires, circuits, and signals. This is the fault line we rarely see, yet every one of us walks upon it. When storms from the sun press against Earth's veil, the first signs appear quietly. Compasses twitch, faint auroras creep farther south, radio static whispers across the airwaves. Yet just below the surface, far more dangerous currents begin their journey. They surge through metal lines, overload transformers, and corrode pipelines. One storm in 1989 plunged millions in Canada into sudden darkness. 9 hours without light, heat, or communication. That was a preview, not the finale. Imagine a storm stronger still, striking not one grid but many, cascading across a continent. Screens go dark, phones fall silent, hospitals switch to emergency power, traffic locks in place. It feels temporary, as though life will return with the next sunrise. But without the silent flow of electricity, days blur into panic. Shelves empty, banks freeze, entire cities tremble in the dark. Far above, satellites circle Earth like watchful eyes. They guide planes, synchronize banks, steer ships across oceans. Yet these orbits are no sanctuary. Radiation storms can blind sensors, scramble GPS, or send a satellite tumbling into silence. In 2003, dozens of satellites reported anomalies during a Halloween storm, some never recovering. Remove them today, and the loss is more than navigational. It is the collapse of time itself. Financial markets depend on GPS timing to the fraction of a second. Without it, transactions drift, systems desynchronize, and chaos ripples across economies faster than any earthquake wave. Beneath the oceans lies another artery of fragility, submarine cables stretching across the seabed. They carry nearly all global internet traffic, a pulse of light travelling through glass fibres no thicker than a hair. Earthquakes snap these lines with ease. Storm-induced currents can corrode repeaters, leaving entire regions cut off. One break is manageable. Several at once in a moment of crisis, and the digital world falls silent. Each of these systems, grids, satellites, cables, stands on its own, yet none exists in isolation. Knock one down, and others sway. A blackout grounds flights. Communication failures delay rescue. Shattered supply chains starve cities of medicine and fuel. What begins as an interruption spirals into paralysis. Warnings already circulate in quiet corners. Military planners rehearse scenarios where satellites vanish and power grids collapse. Economists model trillion-dollar losses from a single storm. Insurance reports speak bluntly. Some events are uninsurable. Yet in daily life, there is no hint of this unease. Lights turn on, signals flow, shelves remain stocked. Stability feels permanent until the moment it isn't. Civilizations of the past, for all their hardships, carried resilience we lack. Rome could lose a city and still function. The Mayans endured drought with tools carved from stone. Even the Akkadians, facing collapse, relied on local systems rather than global networks. By contrast, our world has traded resilience for efficiency. Every city is a hub dependent on distant supply lines, vulnerable to disruptions far beyond the horizon. Picture the fragility in motion. A flare erupts from the sun, followed by a wave of plasma. Hours later, power grids shudder. Satellites blink. Data cables groan. At the same time, stress along tectonic coasts releases in violent motion, shaking ports that feed supply chains. Ships are stranded, markets panic. Within days, the rhythm of ordinary life falters. This is not imagination. It is the natural consequence of dependence woven too tightly. 3i Atlas moves through the same heliospheric currents that shape these storms, expanding turbulence into realms we barely understand. Its presence need not be destructive. It only needs to distort the flows enough that fragile systems reach their breaking point. Just as a faint tremor can topple a glass tower already leaning, so too can turbulence from beyond nudge our networks toward failure. The real weakness of civilization isn't counted in disasters themselves, but in the way one crack spreads into a dozen. The fault line is no longer confined to tectonic boundaries. It runs through every power station, every satellite orbit, every undersea cable, and as storms grow stronger, as quakes cluster, as the comet stirs turbulence in the currents of space, that invisible line strains under pressure. What happens when it finally gives way? That question belongs to the next act. For when systems fall together, the rupture is no longer local. It becomes a cascade. A single spark is rarely enough to bring down a civilization. It takes a chain of failures, each feeding the next, until the weight of collapse is greater than the will to endure. This is the cascade, the moment when disasters stop being separate events and merge into one unstoppable unravelling. Picture a continent in darkness. A solar storm surges through the magnetosphere, currents flooding power lines until transformers explode like fireworks. One grid falls, then another, the outage spreading in waves across borders. From orbit, cities flicker out one by one, the map of modern life dimming into shadow. At first, it feels temporary. People light candles, radios buzz with static, neighbours share supplies. But without power, satellites cannot be guided, flights cannot be tracked, pipelines cannot pump. In the silence, the first cracks widen. Above, satellites reel. Radiation storms knock sensors offline, drain batteries, or shove orbits into dangerous drifts. Within hours, GPS falters. Pilots lose bearings, ships drift blind, and banks struggle to synchronize their transactions. Markets begin to stall, not from lack of will, but from lack of time. Seconds no longer match across systems. In the global economy, time is money, and now both dissolve. Under the oceans, cables hum with fragile light. An earthquake tears across a fault line on the seabed, snapping fibre links that carry data between continents. Repair ships are dispatched, but with ports damaged and navigation in chaos, their journeys stall. Whole regions lose connection. Governments struggle to coordinate. Rumours spread faster than facts. In the dark, fear multiplies. The cascade grows not from one system failing, but from all of them failing together. Without power, communications falter. Without communications, supply chains collapse. Without supply chains, cities run out of food and medicine. Panic erupts in streets as stores empty and fuel runs dry. Order depends on networks invisible to most people. Yet once those networks break, the collapse is visible everywhere. Examples already exist in miniature. In March 1989, Quebec lost power for 9 hours when a geomagnetic storm overwhelmed transformers. In 2011, Japan's earthquake and tsunami halted factories worldwide, exposing how fragile global supply chains had become. In 2003, the Halloween storms damaged dozens of satellites and forced airlines to reroute flights. Each event was manageable alone, none coincided. Imagine if they had. The speed of collapse is what terrifies planners. An earthquake strikes in seconds, a solar storm arrives in hours, supply shortages emerge in days, social unrest follows within weeks. Once these forces align, no response can keep pace. Disasters no longer arrive in sequence but in resonance, amplifying one another like overlapping waves. The collapse does not crawl, it surges. In the silence left behind, cities reveal their dependence. Elevators freeze between floors, hospitals run on dwindling generators, water pumps stall, leaving taps dry. Police radios go silent, leaving orders unspoken. What begins as inconvenience spirals into paralysis. Civilization, for all its strength, proves brittle when the lifeblood of electricity and communication is cut. And through it all, Three-Eye Atlas drifts in the background, unseen by most, yet stirring turbulence in the heliospheric currents. Its presence is not a direct blow, but a subtle push, reshaping flows that feed the storm. The comet does not need to strike. It only needs to arrive at the wrong moment, when the sun rages and the earth trembles. A small distortion in timing may be all it takes to turn disruption into cascade. History teaches that cascades are how civilizations end. The Bronze Age collapse did not come from one cause, but many. Quakes, droughts, invasions, arriving together until empires toppled. Rome weakened under plagues, economic turmoil and natural disasters compounding into decline. The Maya saw cycles of drought and unrest converge until cities emptied. Each collapse was not a single event, but a cascade, and each seemed impossible until it happened. Modern civilization is more vulnerable than any before it. The networks that sustain us are larger, faster, and more interdependent. Efficiency has replaced redundancy. Global trade has replaced local resilience. A single port closing can shake industries across continents. A single blackout can cripple financial systems worldwide. The cascade waits, not in theory, but in the architecture of the world we've built. Picture the first week after convergence. Power gone. Satellites silenced. Internet fractured. Supermarkets stripped bare. Governments scrambling to reassure a population that no longer hears them. In the second week, shortages ignite unrest. Hospitals ration care. Markets freeze. Fear spreads. By the third week, cities transform into fragile islands, each struggling to survive on what little remains. Civilization does not collapse all at once. It unravels in waves, each faster than the last. This is why convergence matters. A solar storm alone, humanity can withstand. An earthquake alone, humanity can rebuild from. Even Three-Eye Atlas alone would be nothing more than a cosmic curiosity, but together, their resonance is greater than the sum of their parts. The cascade is born from alignment, from timing, from the currents of sky and ground meeting in a single fragile moment. What begins as silence on a grid can end as silence in a city. What begins as flickering auroras can end as the flicker of civilization itself. The cascade is not prophecy, it is possibility. And in a world this fragile, possibility is enough. The countdown does not end with one disaster. It ends when the cascade begins. Every cycle has its breaking point. Ice accumulates on a mountainside until one snowflake tips it into an avalanche. Pressure builds along a fault until one tremor unlocks devastation. The magnetosphere absorbs storm after storm until a surge bends it beyond recognition. Our civilization too carries hidden thresholds, and when enough of them align, the line between ordinary disruption and irreversible reset grows razor thin. For months now, signs have flickered like static before a storm. Earthquakes arriving in clusters, as though the planet itself is restless. Auroras stretching into latitudes where they do not belong, painting skies once thought immune to such displays, satellites reporting radiation anomalies, while power companies whisper warnings about transformer fatigue. These are not disasters by themselves, they are rehearsals. Small ruptures in the web, reminding us that resilience has limits. Science explains some of this in careful terms. Faults accumulate stress until release. Solar storms disturb Earth's field. Satellites degrade over time, yet explanation is not reassurance. Behind each mechanism is the same story. Thresholds are being tested, and history tells us that thresholds once crossed rarely return to calm. Imagine the world at that edge. The sun, restless in its cycle, fires a sequence of flares each larger than the last. Earth's magnetosphere bends and twists under the assault until auroras spill across skies in colours unseen for generations. Power grids hum with invisible current, operators praying transformers hold. At the same moment, tectonic clusters awaken. Ports rattle, coastal cities sway, seabeds groan, earth and sky in resonance, vibrating like strings struck by the same note. Now add the stranger in the mix, 3i Atlas. Its vast coma, a plasma cloud rivaling the sun in scale, shifts the heliospheric current sheet as it drifts inward. Particles flow differently. Storms last longer or arrive at sharper angles. Not destruction in itself, but distortion. A cosmic hand turning the dial just enough that the fragile system we built begins to slip. This is the edge of the reset. It does not come as a sudden crash, but as a slow realization that normal is gone. Power outages stretch from hours into days, internet outages from glitches into silence. Earthquakes that once seemed isolated now form chains across regions. Governments insist control remains, yet their words do not match the darkened streets or the empty shelves. Trust evaporates faster than supplies. Resets are not abstract, they are woven into human history. Empires rose, believing themselves eternal, only to unravel when thresholds broke. The Akkadians met drought and quakes together. The Bronze Age crumbled under waves of collapse across multiple kingdoms. The Mayans, once masters of the jungle, saw their cities abandoned as cycles of climate and unrest converged. Each believed in permanence until permanence ended. The difference now is scale. In the past, resets were regional. Today our networks are global. When the fault line ruptures, no corner of the world remains untouched. An outage in one region halts factories in another. A severed cable in the deep ocean isolates continents. A financial crash in one market cascades across all. For the first time, a reset threatens not a single empire, but the whole interconnected lattice of civilization. And still, most will not see it coming. Daily life dulls the sense of fragility. People wake, commute, scroll their feeds, complain about traffic. They see auroras as spectacles, earthquakes as isolated misfortunes, power outages as inconveniences. Only when these threads weave together do they realize the fabric has already torn. The reset is not the end of humanity. It is the end of assumptions, the end of believing that the ground is steady, the sky is benign, the systems we built are indestructible. It is a forced return to reality, that we live on a restless planet beneath a volatile star in a cosmos that does not care for permanence. On the edge of the reset, time itself feels unstable. Days blur under outages, nights glow with storms. The old rhythm of work and trade falters. A new rhythm, one defined by scarcity, fear and uncertainty, emerges. Those who adapt may endure. Those who cling to the old normal may be swept away. Questions multiply. How long can grids hold under repeated storms? How many quakes can ports withstand before supply chains snap? How much distortion can satellites absorb before falling silent? And, perhaps most haunting, how much convergence can a civilization bear before the cascade begins? The edge is not catastrophe itself, it is the moment before, the silence before a quake, the static before a storm. It is the pause when everyone feels something is wrong but cannot name it. In that pause, the countdown is clearest, not measured in seconds but in signals, auroras in wrong skies, tremors in wrong places, silences in systems that once never faltered. Civilizations have crossed this line before, stumbling into resets that reshaped their destiny. We stand at ours now, not knowing if the storm will pass or if the cascade has already begun. The edge is here, and it waits. Thresholds are invisible until they break. A glass looks solid until the final drop of water spills over. A bridge holds until the last load makes it buckle. Civilizations too bend under weight until one more tremor, one more surge, one more spark tips them beyond recovery. That tipping point is the crossing, the moment when the countdown ends and the reset begins. Imagine the world in those first days after the line is crossed. It starts as fragments of news, a regional blackout, a string of undersea cable failures, satellites flickering into silence. Each event could be explained away. A storm here, an earthquake there, a technical glitch. But the timing betrays coincidence. Too many failures at once, too many silences spreading through the systems that tie us together. On the ground, the shift feels subtle at first. Trains stall mid-journey, waiting for signals that never come. Markets delay trading, then close altogether as transactions desynchronize. Phones display only error messages. Hospitals run low on fuel for their generators. Cities stumble but do not yet fall. People assume restoration is coming, as it always has before. Then the hours stretch. A blackout meant to last overnight becomes days long. Stores ration food. Gas stations shut pumps. News anchors vanish from screens. In the absence of information, rumours replace fact. Some say foreign powers are attacking. Others whisper of cosmic omens. Fear grows in the silence, each story more dramatic than the last. At night, auroras ripple far from polar skies, glowing above darkened cities. They are beautiful, eerie, unforgettable, and for those who understand what they mean, terrifying. The magnetosphere has bent far beyond its usual shape. Storms are still arriving, and without satellites to measure or grids to buffer, no one knows how much worse it will get. Crossing the threshold is not about destruction in a single blow. It is about the slow realization that recovery is slipping out of reach. Supply chains falter not for a week, but indefinitely. Governments speak in vague reassurances, but their words reach fewer and fewer ears. Local authorities take matters into their own hands. Curfews are set. Emergency centres overflow. Fear reshapes daily life. History offers echoes of this crossing. In 536 AD, volcanic ash dimmed the sun for months, crops failed, and famine spread across continents. In the 14th century, plague shattered Europe, leaving societies forever changed. In 1815, Tambara's eruption brought a year without summer, rewriting economies and cultures alike. None of these moments ended humanity, but all redefined it. The difference now is that the reset would not strike regions. It would engulf the globe at once. And within this turmoil, 3I Atlas drifts closer. Its coma, already vast, interacts with solar winds that refuse to calm. Scientists who once watched with curiosity now fall silent, their instruments overwhelmed or destroyed. To the public, the comet becomes a symbol, a beacon in the sky of something beyond human control. To some, it is an omen. To others, a reminder of forces that do not bend to technology or governments. Its presence during the crossing is less about collision than convergence, a reminder that the universe does not wait for us to be ready. Crossing the threshold also transforms perception. Before, disruptions felt temporary, like storms that would pass. After, they feel permanent. People stop waiting for systems to return and start adjusting to their absence. Paper replaces digital transactions. Communities form around local resources. Old skills resurface as modern conveniences vanish. For many, this is survival. For some, it is liberation. For all, it is the end of the world as they knew it. The reset is not instant apocalypse. Cities do not vanish in fire. Nations do not crumble in a single quake. Instead, structures erode as the weight of convergence outpaces our ability to respond. The sun rages. The earth shifts. The interstellar stranger distorts the currents around us. And humanity, caught between them, learns how fragile its foundations truly are. Crossing the threshold is both ending and beginning. It is the closing of one age, the digital, global, interconnected civilization we thought eternal. It is also the opening of another, one not yet defined, shaped by resilience, adaptation, or collapse. Resets do not choose their outcomes, they only clear the slate. What rises after depends on what survives during. For those alive in that moment, the crossing feels less like history and more like disorientation. Time fractures. Days blur without electricity to mark them. Nights stretch longer, lit only by auroras and firelight. Without the hum of machines, silence grows heavy. And in that silence, a question whispers louder than any warning. Is this the end of what we were, or the beginning of what we must become? The countdown does not end with the crossing. It only resets its clock. A new cycle begins, not of certainty, but of survival. Humanity has faced such moments before, and each time it emerged transformed. Yet never has the crossing been so global, so total, so immediate. The edge is behind us. The reset has begun. Nights are no longer quiet. They breathe with colours. Curtains of green and violet spill across skies where satellites once blinked. Cities beneath them lie dark, outlines of towers like broken teeth against the auroras. For the first time in generations, the heavens feel larger than the ground. People gather outside because their homes are silent. No glow of screens, no hum of machines. Firelight replaces neon. In the flicker, conversations stretch late into the night. What once was small talk now bends toward myth. Questions about omens, fate, and cycles. The comet above, Three-Eye Atlas, gleams like a lantern in the void. Some whisper that it came to watch. Others say it came to judge. Few believe it came without purpose. Once ruled by fractions of a second, the markets now drift as slowly as footsteps on a floor. A woman lays out jars of honey. A man trades boots for salt. Children carry baskets of apples down avenues where stock tickers used to scroll. The collapse of speed feels like the collapse of certainty. In its place rises an older rhythm, one the earth remembers even if people had forgotten. The aftershocks ripple not only through earth and sky, but through imagination. Stories spread faster than news. In one city, they speak of a river turning red under the auroras. In another, they tell of animals fleeing hours before the last quake. Most stories blur fact with fear, yet each is believed because each contains a fragment of survival. Without broadcasts, rumour becomes scripture. At dawn, silence weighs heavier than darkness. Generators cough, then fail. Radios crackle, then fall quiet. The world has narrowed to what eyes can see, what voices can carry, what hands can hold. Distance stretches. A friend across the country may as well live on another star. And yet something ancient stirs in the absence. Songs return. Drums beat in alleys. People carve symbols into walls as if marking their passage through this strange twilight age. Children, unburdened by memory of the old order, chase fireflies instead of pixels. They grow up watching skies that tell stories every night. Auroras like rivers, the comet's tail like a spear, the moon dimmed by haze. For them, the world has always been this way. But for those who remember, grief lingers. The hum of a refrigerator, the buzz of streetlights, the voice of a loved one on the other side of the world, carried through cables under oceans, all gone. Each small absence is a wound. Each wound deepens with time. The reset is not only a collapse of systems, it is a collapse of memory, of the invisible comforts that once defined daily life. The Earth does not pause to mourn. Quakes rumble through fault lines still shifting. Solar winds buffet the magnetosphere, igniting new curtains of light. 3i Atlas continues its slow arc across the heavens, a reminder that this age was not ended by politics or war, but by convergence, by forces that speak in plasma and stone, in tides and orbits, in languages older than humanity itself. In the aftershocks, new hierarchies emerge, not of governments or corporations, but of skills. The healer with herbs is sought after. The farmer with seeds becomes powerful. The blacksmith who can shape iron is valued above the banker who once commanded markets. Knowledge tilts from the abstract to the tangible, from the digital cloud to the soil beneath one's feet. But even in this reshaping, questions echo. Is the reset an ending or an initiation? Is humanity being broken or being prepared? The comet's presence above seems almost deliberate, as if scripted into the very fabric of the crisis. A reminder that perhaps the Earth is not alone in its trials. Perhaps resets are woven into the universe itself, moments where cycles close and something unfamiliar begins. Dreams take on new weight. Survivors speak of visions, oceans rising, skies splitting, voices whispering in languages never learned. Some claim these are messages from the comet. Others dismiss them as the mind's way of coping with terror. But the timing is uncanny. As auroras bloom above, as earthquakes roll beneath, as silence deepens in cities, dreams intensify, carrying images that refuse to fade upon waking. In those dreams, many see fire not as destruction, but as renewal. Forests burn so new shoots can grow. Stars die so new stars are born. Perhaps civilization too must burn to be reborn. It is a dangerous thought, but one that spreads because it carries hope, that suffering is not meaningless, but part of a cycle larger than any single life. The aftershocks are not uniform. In some places, people descend into fear, hoarding, violence. In others, they discover resilience, sharing what they have, forming bonds stronger than any network ever provided. The reset reveals character as much as it reveals weakness. It strips away the masks of modern life and leaves only what endures when everything else falls away. Nights remain longest in memory. In villages without light pollution, the sky opens wider than it has in centuries. Children point to constellations never before visible through the haze of industry. Elders tell stories of creation and flood, of fire and rebirth, of stars guiding travellers through uncharted lands. The sky becomes a book again, each streak of light a verse, each aurora a chapter. Months pass, and the question grows sharper. Will the aftershocks subside, or are they only the prelude to something greater? The comet lingers, as though waiting for its final act. The sun, restless at its peak, flares without mercy. Fault lines groan, threatening ruptures still to come. No one knows if this is the end of the reset's beginning, or the beginning of its end. The aftershocks remind humanity of something it once knew but forgot. Fragility is not weakness. Fragility is sensitivity, a connection to forces larger than ourselves. Civilization's arrogance lay in assuming it was immune to cycles. The reset shatters that illusion, and in the silence that follows, a new awareness dawns. Auroras flow, quakes whisper, the comet glows. Aftershocks ripple not just through stone and steel but through hearts. And in that trembling, humanity stands at a threshold once again, unsure if it has been diminished, or if it has been prepared for a horizon it cannot yet see. Darkness has never lasted this long. Nights stretch like oceans, swallowing the hours once divided by clocks and screens. Without electricity, time bends. Days feel shorter, nights eternal, as if the sun itself hesitates to return. The long night is not just the absence of light, it is the absence of certainty. cities become islands of silence. Skyscrapers loom as monuments to another age, their windows black, their steel frames groaning in the wind. Streets echo with footsteps instead of engines. Fires flicker in courtyards where neon once buzzed. To walk through a metropolis now is to wander a graveyard of progress, where shadows move with memory more than purpose. Yet the sky is alive. Auroras ripple in waves, brighter and stranger than ever recorded. They pulse across continents, painting horizons in colours that make oceans glow and forests shimmer. People lift their faces in awe and terror. The heavens feel closer, as if the veil between worlds has thinned. Above all hangs the comet, Three-Eye Atlas, its coma vast, its tail stretching like a wound across the night. It is both a spectacle and a warning, a sign that this long night belongs not only to Earth but to the cosmos. The long night is more than physical darkness. It is the silence of voices once carried across the world. Radios sputter with static. Cables lie broken in the sea. Messages once instant are now impossible. A family separated by borders becomes separated by silence. The world shrinks to what can be seen, touched, or shouted across a field. Distance, once conquered, returns as an ancient barrier. Fear breeds in the silence. Stories spread by firelight. Some whisper that the comet is not a visitor, but a herald, marking the end of one cycle and the birth of another. Others claim it is the source of the storms, stirring the sun into frenzy and the earth into tremors. Whether true or not, belief grows, and belief shapes reality. Communities form rituals under its glow, lighting torches, offering prayers, chanting names for stars long forgotten. The night becomes not only long but sacred, heavy with meaning, but not all find awe in the dark. In some places, fear fractures into violence. Scarcity sharpens suspicion. Strangers are no longer neighbours but threats. Roads become dangerous. Water sources guarded. Guns, once locked away, now hang in plain sight. The long night tests not only systems but souls, dividing those who cling to power from those who cling to hope. Still, resilience persists in unlikely places. Villages gather to share food and stories. Farmers sow by starlight, guided by constellations instead of satellite forecasts. Children chase sparks from the fire, laughing at shadows instead of fearing them. In the darkest season, fragments of light endure, not from machines but from human connection. The long night feels endless because no one knows when or if dawn will return. Without satellites, the future of storms cannot be predicted. Without grids, clocks drift. Without networks, knowledge is fractured. People count days by the phases of the moon, by the tides, by the rise and fall of auroras. Time returns to the body and the earth rather than the machine. Dreams intensify in this night. Survivors describe visions of burning skies, collapsing mountains, and voices whispering in languages that feel both ancient and alien. Some awaken convinced they have seen the future. Others believe they have glimpsed the past, echoes of civilizations that fell before. Dreams blur into prophecy, and prophecy becomes a kind of guidance. In the absence of certainty, even the subconscious becomes a compass. History has its own long nights. After the fall of Rome, centuries of darkness stretched across Europe, lit only by scattered monasteries and memory. After the Bronze Age collapse, kingdoms faded into myth, their names surviving only in whispers on clay tablets. In each case, dawn returned, but not the same dawn. The world that rose was different from the one that fell. The same truth holds here. When the long night ends, its survivors will not recognize the morning. Three-Eye Atlas continues its arc, silent yet commanding. Its presence transforms the night sky into a theatre of symbolism. Some see it as a sword, others as an eye, still others as a gateway. Its role in the convergence is unclear, but its timing is undeniable. The comet is not merely passing, it is participating, its tail woven into the same fabric as the storms and the quakes. To gaze at it is to feel both small and chosen, as if humanity has been cast into a story written on scales beyond comprehension. The long night is the crucible. It strips away illusions. It forces humanity to confront what it has lost, what it still has, and what it must become. Some will not endure. Others will emerge altered, stronger, tempered like iron in fire. The night does not choose, it reveals. In the silence, one question grows louder than any. Is this darkness the end? Or is it the womb of a dawn yet to come? The answer does not lie in governments or technologies, for those are already gone. It lies in choices made by individuals, families, and small circles of survivors. Do they hoard or share? Do they fear or trust? Do they cling to the old or imagine something new? The long night will pass. Every night eventually yields to light. But the world waiting on the other side will not be the same. The reset is irreversible. The cycle has turned, and when the first rays of dawn finally cut through the auroras, humanity will stand not in the world it remembers, but in the world it has remade. The long night does not end with silence. It ends with light, strange, fractured, almost too sharp to trust. When the sun rises after weeks of auroras and blackouts, it reveals not restoration, but exposure. Streets once hidden in shadow are littered with broken glass, collapsed wires, and the skeletal remains of grids that no longer hum. Fields show crops left unharvested, wilting beneath skies still bruised with dust. Dawn has come, but it is not the dawn anyone remembers. Communities emerge cautiously. Eyes blink against the brightness as though they have forgotten the rhythm of day. Fires are doused. Caches of food are inventoried. Water is checked. Survival has narrowed perception. People notice every crack in the pavement, every flicker of the sky, every tremor underfoot. The smallest details, once dismissed as background noise, now feel like signals. In a world this fragile, what counts as normal? Science provides one kind of answer. Solar Cycle 25 continues to produce eruptions that exceed forecasts. Instruments that survived in isolated observatories confirm flares pushing the magnetosphere into contortions unseen in decades. Seismographs, still scratching on paper drums where electricity allows, mark clusters of tremors that defy usual statistical decay. These are not hypotheticals. They are records, verified by the few institutions still operating in fragments. The environment itself is louder, more restless. Even so, explanation only sharpens the unease. If this is the baseline, what comes next? How much stress can fault lines absorb? How many more storms can the grids that remain withstand? What role does 3i Atlas play as it continues its passage, a plasma shroud drifting through the heliosphere's currents? Even without mystical language, the timing alone forces the question. Are these convergences random overlap? Or are we watching a resonance build towards something larger? Dawn is not just an illumination of ruins, it is an illumination of thought. People gather in open squares and argue over meaning. Some insist this is the natural cycle of Earth and Sun, a brutal but inevitable reminder of planetary dynamics. Others claim the comet has altered the balance, acting like a conductor in a cosmic circuit. A few go further, suggesting that these events are less catastrophe than initiation, a reset written not only in physics but in archetypes humanity has carried for millennia. History offers context but also caution. Civilizations have faced dawns after collapse before. Rome did not vanish in a night, it eroded until what remained looked nothing like what came before. The Bronze Age did not collapse from one disaster, but from many converging until the old world could not sustain itself. Each dawn that followed was not a return, but a transformation. The same may be unfolding here. The morning light reveals not recovery, but the start of a new cycle whose outcome cannot yet be measured. Meanwhile, the comet dominates the skies, 3i Atlas grows brighter as it nears perihelion, its coma spanning distances so vast that telescopes measure distortions in solar wind flow. Astronomers who still send out bulletins describe it in neutral terms: density fluctuations, field interactions, plasma sheaths. But outside the observatories, the language is different. Farmers call it an omen, children call it the Watcher, communities whisper that its timing was no accident, that the reset carries a signature written in its tail, and so dawn becomes more than light, it becomes interpretation. Is this the hour of recovery or the hour of reckoning? Are we being offered a chance to rebuild differently, or warned that the worst is still ahead? The facts, solar storms, seismic clusters, interstellar visitors, are indisputable. The meaning of those facts is contested, refracted through fear, hope, and imagination. The air itself seems charged with this ambiguity. Walk through a ruined city and you hear it. The silence between collapses, broken by arguments, laughter, prayers, and shouts. Walk into a rural valley and you see it. Fields being replanted, even as neighbours debate whether the earth will give back what it once did. Dawn divides and unites, depending on where you stand. And beneath it all, the question remains unresolved. Is the reset an ending or a beginning? The sun does not answer. The comet does not answer. The Earth, restless with aftershocks, offers no reassurance. The only certainty is that humanity is now awake, rudely, brutally, undeniably awake to its fragility. Dawn is exposure. Dawn is reminder. Dawn is threshold. And as the reset unfolds, it is the threshold that matters most. For thresholds demand crossing, whether willingly or not. Every cycle ends with a question. What remains when the dust clears? For civilizations before us, the answer was written in ruins, in myths, in fragments of tablets and broken walls. For us, the answer is still in motion, unfolding beneath skies lit by a visitor from beyond. 3i Atlas lingers above, its 3 points of brilliance shimmering like signals in the void. We cannot ignore its timing, nor its symbolism. It is not just a comet. It is the marker of the reset, the reminder that what feels permanent is always temporary. Science traces the details. Interstellar objects are rare, yet they come. This one, pulled into the solar system at the same moment our sun peaks in volatility, when Earth's crust groans under strain, when magnetic fields distort. It is coincidence on a scale difficult to dismiss. Plasma tails hundreds of thousands of kilometers long interact with the solar wind, twisting currents that feed into the heliosphere itself. Instruments detect anomalies, fluxes of density, distortions in resonance. These are not inventions, they are measurements. But the facts do not end the story, they ignite it. If a comet from interstellar space can alter the balance of solar winds, what else can it do? If plasma interactions ripple through Earth's magnetosphere, can they reach fault lines already stressed to breaking? If cycles converge, do they amplify each other, or do they simply align as reminders of the scale of forces beyond our control? These are not certainties, they are provocations, and provocations are what drive history forward. The Atlas effect is not a single event, but a pattern of recognition. It is the moment we realize that fragility is not weakness. It is the reality of living inside a system where Earth, Sun, and cosmos are entangled. Our mistake was to believe we had risen above it, that electricity and satellites freed us from the pulse of the stars and the rumble of the ground. The reset exposes that illusion. Yet resets are not only collapse, they are also transition. When fault lines rupture, they release pressure that has built for centuries. When solar storms erupt, they remind us of the sun's cycles that seed both life and destruction. When interstellar objects arrive, they bring with them not just disruption but perspective. We are part of a system larger than we can control. What looks like disaster may also be initiation, a threshold into a different age. History shows that civilizations fall, but humanity persists. Rome's collapse gave way to new orders. The Bronze Age fall birthed myths that still echo today. Each reset carved new paths, even as it erased old ones. The Atlas effect may follow the same pattern, though its scale feels larger, cosmic rather than regional. Whether we interpret it as punishment, as chance, or as cycle, the effect is the same. We are forced to reckon with forces outside our design. The comet is the perfect symbol for this reckoning. Interstellar, transient, impossible to claim. It does not belong to us, yet it has become part of our story. Children point to it with wonder. Elders mutter prayers when they see its glow. Scientists debate its plasma, while storytellers weave it into prophecy. Three-Eye Atlas has entered our consciousness as deeply as it has entered our solar system. Its effect is psychological as much as physical. And so the Atlas effect is dual. It is what happens to our planet when cycles converge, and what happens to our minds when we face that convergence. Earthquakes may devastate cities, solar storms may collapse grids, the comet may warp fields, but the greater shift may be within us. For once, humanity is reminded of its scale, its limits, its place in a system it does not command. That reminder may be the most valuable effect of all. The reset is not a prophecy fulfilled or a script completed. It is a turning of the page. Whether the next chapter is survival, transformation, or extinction depends not on the comet or the storms, but on choices made in the aftermath. Do we cling to the illusion of control, or do we adapt to cycles larger than ourselves? Do we rebuild as before, or do we learn to live within thresholds we cannot move? These are the questions of the dawn, and they are questions no system can answer for us. Perhaps that is the essence of the Atlas effect. The comet holds a mirror to civilization, showing both its brilliance and its arrogance. Earthquakes and storms remind us of the foundation we have always stood upon, unpredictable, shifting, alive. The heliosphere itself becomes a stage where our fragility is not failure, but fact. To acknowledge that fact is not defeat. It is the first step into awareness. The sun may have risen, but certainty has not returned with it. The long night has broken, yet the world it reveals is one where every tremor and every flicker of light feels like a signal. Survival continues, but confidence does not. What people now call normal is only a fragile balance, one quake or one storm away from unraveling again. Communities are awake in ways they never were before, eyes scanning the skies for auroras, ears tuned to the ground for rumbles, whispers spreading each time Three-Eye Atlas glows against the horizon. This dawn is not an ending but a beginning, a threshold. It shows us that collapse is not a single event, but a state that lingers, shaping memory and reshaping imagination. We're no longer who we were before the reset began. The question is no longer whether change is coming, it is already here. The question is what it means, and whether we will recognize the echoes that have always warned us. The dawn after the reset reveals not only ruins and questions, but also echoes. Humanity has stood at thresholds before, though the language we used to describe them was not scientific, but mythic. Our ancestors, lacking satellites or seismographs, left warnings in the only medium that could outlast their lifetimes: stories. And though these stories are cloaked in metaphor, the patterns they carry remain. They speak of skies that grew restless, of ground that convulsed, of civilizations that fell in cascades. Look first to China, where chronicles dating back more than 2,000 years describe dragons of fire streaking across the heavens before the earth split open in quakes. The scribes did not know of auroras or geomagnetic storms. They spoke instead of dragons unfurling in the skies, their coils glowing red and green, their roars shaking mountains. To the modern ear, this is myth. Yet auroras, driven far south by intense solar storms, would appear exactly so. Writhing curtains of colour, unfamiliar and terrifying to those who rarely saw them. That they appeared near times of earthquake may be coincidence, or it may be memory. The observation that fire in the sky and convulsions below often arrived hand in hand. Cross the ocean to the Andes, where Quechua and Aymara myths tell of skyfire before floods and ground-shaking disasters. These tales speak of a glowing serpent winding across the heavens, its breath a scorching wind, its gaze enough to shatter the earth. Again, mythic language, but again, the pattern is familiar. Light above, convulsion below, chaos in between. When Spanish chroniclers recorded these accounts centuries later, they dismissed them as pagan fables. Yet now, with satellites recording the coupling of geomagnetic storms and tectonic timing, the possibility arises that these myths were not fables, but seismographs in story form. Norse mythology carries the same resonance. In the sagas, Ragnarok begins with Fimbul winter, endless cold, skies torn by strange lights, the earth trembling as giants stir beneath it. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and fire from the sky mingle in a single catastrophic tapestry. To the Norse, these were prophecies of an ending yet to come. To us, they may be distorted memories of earlier convergences, volcanic winters compounded by quakes, auroras blazing during times of solar unrest. The sagas may not be predictions at all, but survival of memory through myth. Even in the Near East, echoes persist. The Bible's flood story speaks not only of rising waters, but of heavens opening, the stars falling, and the earth trembling. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe celestial omens preceding disasters, gods casting fire from the sky before world crumbled. Sumerian inscriptions tell of Nibiru, the wandering star, bringing upheaval when it returned. Scholars debate whether these are allegories or astronomy misremembered, but within them again is the rhythm: skyfire, flood, quake, reset. Why would so many cultures, separated by continents and centuries, preserve the same sequence? It is unlikely they shared stories directly. More plausible is that they shared experiences. Solar storms and auroras do not respect borders. Earthquakes and floods strike wherever plates and waters demand. A civilization that witnessed convergence would encode it in story, passing the memory forward not as science but as myth. And because myth survives in ways data often does not, those memories reach us still. Modern science has begun to uncover evidence that supports what the myths hint. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica record sudden spikes of beryllium-10 and carbon-14, isotopes created when cosmic radiation surges during solar storms. These spikes align with centuries when myths of floods, fire and resets proliferated. Tree rings too carry scars of strange seasons, years of stunted growth after massive eruptions or solar-driven climate anomalies. Even geology whispers the same sequence. Sediments preserve tsunami deposits alongside layers rich in volcanic ash and anomalies in atmospheric chemistry. Disparate events, yes, but clustered in time, just as myths describe. What makes this unsettling is that our present moment mirrors these ancient warnings. The auroras have already spilled far from the poles, lighting skies over cities unaccustomed to them. Earthquakes have clustered in regions that were quiet for centuries. And above us, a visitor from beyond, Three-Eye Atlas, drifts through the heliospheric currents, its vast plasma tail stirring turbulence. To ancient chroniclers, this would not have been dismissed as coincidence. It would have been read as omen. Pause here and imagine an observer in the distant past. They see auroras ripple, quakes shatter, a flood surge. They do not know of magnetic fields or interstellar plasma. They see gods fighting, dragons burning, stars falling. They tell their children, who tell theirs. The language shifts, the metaphors multiply, but the pattern endures. Thousands of years later, we read these myths and smile at their imagination. Yet perhaps imagination was not the point. Perhaps memory was. This possibility reshapes how we should read the stories. Instead of dismissing them as fables, we can approach them as survival guides encoded in metaphor. They remind us that convergence is not new. that civilizations before us have faced skies that glowed and grounds that broke. They whisper that resets are not singular but cyclical, and they warn that silence is never safety, that the universe has always spoken in lights and tremors. Skeptics will argue that myths cannot be evidence. They're too vague, too symbolic, too malleable. That is true. But evidence is not the only function of myth. Its purpose is to carry memory across generations, to distill experience into form. Even if dragons were auroras, even if gods were comets, even if prophecies were weather, the memory of pattern remains. The myths tell us that when the sky grows strange, the earth soon follows, and that is a warning we cannot ignore. Consider too how myths often describe not only destruction, but renewal. After Ragnarök, a new world rises from the sea. After the biblical flood, a covenant is made and life begins again. After Andean quakes and floods, new suns are born, new ages begin. This rhythm, ending, memory, renewal, mirrors what geology tells us. Extinctions are followed by radiations, collapses by rebuildings. Myths, in their own language, teach resilience. They do not only warn of cycles, they remind us that cycles contain beginnings as well as endings. Which brings us back to the present. If we stand at the dawn of a reset, then perhaps we are also standing in the company of our ancestors, repeating a moment they knew in mythic form. The auroras above us are their dragons. The tremors beneath are their giants stirring. The comet in the sky is their omen of wandering gods. They left us their warnings, wrapped in story, carried across centuries so that we might remember. The question is whether we will. For we live in an age that trusts numbers more than tales, instruments more than myths, and yet both speak now. Seismographs scratch lines that echo the tremors of ancient accounts. Satellites record storms that match the skyfire of old, and Three-Eye Atlas blazes above, as unignorable as any god or dragon. The forgotten warnings are not so forgotten after all. They are all around us, resurfacing in auroras, quakes, and plasma tales. They tell us that what feels unprecedented is in fact deeply familiar, that civilizations have faced this convergence before, that silence is never safety, and that memory, whether told in myth or measured in isotopes, is survival's only true companion. Perhaps that is why the myths endure, not because they are fanciful, but because they are true in the only way that matters. They remind us of patterns too large to deny, and as we listen to their echoes, we begin to hear the warning that has always been there, that the reset is not a question of if, but of when, and that awareness is the only preparation we have. If myths are cultural seismographs, then the question is not whether they are literal, but whether they preserve truth in symbolic form. The stories of dragons in the sky, gods casting fire, floods washing away civilizations, these are not simply entertainment. They are cultural memories encoded to endure. To dismiss them as fantasy is to miss their function. They were the archives of peoples who had no satellites, no seismographs, no vaults. When the ground shook and the heavens glowed, they inscribed what they saw in the only medium available to them, myth. And when we place these myths alongside one another, spanning continents and centuries, patterns emerge. Patterns that suggest humanity has witnessed resets before. Not global in the sense of the Chicxulub asteroid, but resets of civilizations, cultures, and memory. The forgotten warnings are not only about natural disasters, they're about how those disasters reverberated through human systems. Take the collapse of the Akkadian Empire around 2200 BCE. Records describe famine, rebellion, and darkness in the sky. Paleoclimate data now confirms that this period coincided with a sudden mega-drought, likely triggered by shifts in monsoons and compounded by tectonic disruption. The Akkadians framed it as the wrath of gods, omens in the stars, silence from the heavens. To them, the quakes and dust storms were divine messages. To us, they look like the overlapping of climate stress and seismic activity. Two worlds, two languages, the same convergence, or consider the Mayans. Their collapse around 900 CE has long been attributed to drought, but carved stele also describe sky omens and quakes shaking temples. In the myths that survived, the gods of maize and sky battled. The world trembled and order unravelled. Modern cores from lakes in the Yucatan show centuries of erratic rainfall, punctuated by earthquakes along fault lines. Again, convergence, water, earth, and sky moving together. The Mayans remembered in story what sediments now confirm in data. The Norse too lived through volcanic winters. Around 536 CE, a massive eruption, likely in Iceland, dimmed the skies across Europe. Records from Constantinople describe the sun as dark, the air filled with dust, harvests failing. In Scandinavia, myth remembered this as Fimbul winter, the endless cold before Ragnarok. The sagas told of wolves devouring the sun, of the earth shaking as giants stirred. Their ancestors did not have ice cores or volcanology. They had stories, and those stories captured the despair of endless night, quakes, and the sense that an age was ending. What these cases show is that myth is not fiction detached from fact. It is fact remembered through metaphor. Dragons of fire are auroras, giants shaking mountains are earthquakes, wolves devouring the sun are volcanic winters, floods are tsunamis and glacial melts. Each tale is a translation of convergence into narrative, and if convergences repeat, so too do the stories. This makes the present moment uncanny, for we live in an age when the convergences described in myth are reappearing in data, auroras spilling beyond the poles, earthquakes clustering in unusual sequences, solar storms surging during a solar maximum, and above it all Three-Eye Atlas blazing red in the sky. To ancient chroniclers, this would be a prophecy fulfilled. To us, it is coincidence stacked upon coincidence, until the coincidences form a pattern too dense to ignore. Science itself has begun to acknowledge the resonance. Studies in paleoseismology show that major fault lines sometimes activate in clusters, triggered by global stresses. Solar physics reveals how coronal mass ejections can compress Earth's magnetic field, inducing currents that destabilize infrastructure, and possibly even stress tectonics at fault margins. Archaeology uncovers ruins timed with environmental upheavals, while anthropology traces myths that encode the same. The forgotten warnings are aligning with evidence. What makes this alignment profound is that it changes how we see memory. We often think of memory as fragile, easily lost, but myths show that memory can endure across thousands of years, carried not in precise data, but in story. The very vagueness that makes myth hard to test is what allows it to survive. Exact measurements are lost when writing crumbles, but metaphors of dragons and gods persist. They cross languages, cross ages, and reach us still. Pause and imagine a civilization 10,000 years from now. What will they remember of us? Our satellites will be gone, our servers erased, our skyscrapers dust. But perhaps a fragment of myth will remain, a story told of a sky that blazed red and green before the earth shook, of a wandering star that passed and changed everything. That story may carry forward long after the science is forgotten. Myths are not precise, but they are resilient. They are the DNA of cultural memory. And perhaps this is the deeper function of the forgotten warnings. They are not only about survival in the moment, they are about survival across cycles. Each myth says, in its own way, pay attention, for this has happened before, and it will happen again. Myths are time capsules, carried not in metal or stone, but in imagination. And because imagination endures, the message endures. This reflection reframes our current convergence. The auroras, the quakes, the storms, the comet. They are not only events, they are echoes of echoes, familiar patterns returning in a new age. The ancients faced them, survived them, and remembered them. Now it is our turn to face them, to interpret them, and to decide how we will be remembered. Perhaps the lesson of the forgotten warnings is humility. We are not the first to tremble beneath strange skies. We are not the first to see omens in lights and quakes, but we are the first to hold both myth and science in our hands, to see the resonance between them, to measure what our ancestors only described. That dual awareness is unprecedented. It is our advantage, if we choose to use it. The convergence of Three-Eye Atlas with solar storms and seismic unrest may be coincidence, or it may be part of the rhythm the myths preserved. Either way, the meaning is the same: awareness. Awareness that cycles turn. Awareness that memory is survival. Awareness that we are participants in a story larger than us. And in this awareness, myth ceases to be forgotten. It becomes present again. The dragons are back in the skies, the giants are stirring in the earth, the gods are whispering through storms. Not literally, but metaphorically, which is to say in the only way memory can endure across ages. What we do with that memory now will determine whether we become another myth, another warning, another echo. For the past does not only warn, it also hands us responsibility. If we recognize the patterns, if we listen to the warnings, then perhaps we can soften the reset. Perhaps we can become not only subjects of myth, but stewards of memory. That is the choice before us, to forget and repeat, or to remember and adapt. The myths have done their part. They survived the ages to reach us. The question is whether we will do ours. When we picture collapse, the imagination often seeks a single cause: an invader breaching walls, a volcano erupting, a flood sweeping through fields. Yet the record of history tells a different story. Civilizations rarely fall in one blow. They unravel through cascades when several pressures converge, compounding until the networks of daily life can no longer hold. If we wish to understand what the Three-Eye Atlas effect might mean for us, we must study those earlier cascades, not as curiosities of the past, but as rehearsals of what convergence can do. Consider the Akkadian Empire founded by Sargon the Great in Mesopotamia, more than 4,000 years ago. For centuries it thrived, uniting city-states, irrigating rivers, expanding trade. Yet around 2200 BC, it collapsed into famine, rebellion, and abandonment. Archaeology reveals a mega-drought that parched the region, confirmed by dust deposits and tree rings. But drought alone does not bring down an empire of millions. Records describe earthquakes that toppled temples, skies filled with ominous portents, and provinces revolting against central control. The fall of Akkad was not a single disaster, it was convergence. Climate failure weakened food supplies, tremors damaged infrastructure, unrest toppled the fragile balance. The Akkadians believed the gods had turned against them. We might call it systemic fragility. The Late Bronze Age offers another echo. By 1200 BC, a vast network stretched from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia, bound together by trade in tin, copper, grain, and knowledge. Within little more than a century, much of it was gone. Palaces burned, scripts disappeared, kingdoms vanished. Scholars long argued whether drought, invasions, or economic weakness were to blame. Yet evidence now points to earthquakes across the eastern Mediterranean, striking ports and cities already weakened by hunger and war. Solar activity may also have shifted, throwing climate patterns into turmoil. It was not one blow, but many arriving together. The Bronze Age world did not fall because of a single invader. It cascaded because multiple stresses struck a fragile network at once. The Maya civilization tells a similar story. Flourishing from AD 250 to 900, it produced cities of stone, calendars of precision, and art of immense beauty. But by the 10th century, many great centres had been abandoned. Lake cores show centuries of drought. Carved stelae mention earthquakes and famines. Myths recall gods withdrawing their favour, temples cracking, skies dark with omens. Archaeologists now speak of a classic Maya collapse, not as a single event, but as decades of cascading stress, environmental, political, seismic. Drought weakened crops, warfare spread, quakes toppled temples, and the cities emptied, leaving behind descendants who carried fragments of memory and story and ritual. Even Rome, which endured longer than any empire before it, eventually succumbed to cascades. In the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, pressures multiplied: barbarian invasions, plagues, earthquakes, and political strife. Some scholars suggest declining solar activity contributed to colder winters and shorter harvests. Each factor alone could have been managed. Together, they overwhelmed even Rome's formidable resilience. The empire did not fall in a year, but through centuries of convergences that frayed its networks until the western half collapsed, leaving only fragments to carry the name. These cases reveal a pattern. Civilizations fall not because of isolated disasters, but because disasters arrive in clusters. Fragility is not weakness in one area, but dependence on many. Irrigation, trade, political alliances and belief systems all support each other. And when several falter together, collapse accelerates. Now place this alongside our present. Today, our civilization is more interconnected than any before. Food arrives through global logistics that rely on satellites. Electricity flows across vast grids linked by delicate circuits. Finance depends on synchronized clocks orbiting in space. We are robust in ordinary times, yet fragile when shocks converge. A solar storm alone could disrupt satellites. An earthquake alone could damage a port. Climate extremes alone could strain harvests. But together, cascading, they could become a reset. History shows how quickly cascades can move once fragility is exposed. In the late Bronze Age, a century was enough to undo a world system. In Rome, centuries. In the Maya lowlands, decades. But in our world, with its instantaneous communication and globalized markets, cascades could unfold in months, even weeks. A coronal mass ejection disables satellites. Earthquakes damage infrastructure. Supply chains falter. Fear spreads faster than food. Markets seize. Confidence erodes. What took centuries before may take seasons now. The myths we explored in Part 8 gain new weight here. To ancient peoples, convergences of quake, storm, and skyfire were wrath of gods. To us, they are systemic vulnerabilities. But the lived experience was the same. Collapse felt total, even when it began with only a few failures converging. A farmer in Akkad did not see climate models. He saw empty canals and broken walls. A Mayan priest did not measure rainfall in millimeters. He saw temples cracked and gods silent. A Roman senator did not calculate solar cycles. He saw borders breached and plagues sweeping cities. For them, collapse was not theory. It was lived convergence. Pause and imagine the Bronze Age merchant, waiting in a port for ships that never came. Imagine the Maya farmer staring at withered maize as quakes shook the ground. Imagine the Roman soldier guarding a frontier while earthquakes cracked aqueducts and invaders pressed in. Each saw only fragments. Yet together, the fragments formed cascades. Now consider our world. Replace ships with satellites, canals with power grids, temples with data centers. Replace drought with climate extremes, invaders with cyber attacks, plagues with pandemics. The pattern remains. Our systems are more advanced but also more interdependent. Fragility today is the price of complexity. The lesson of cascades is not despair but humility. Collapse is not inevitable. It is conditional. It depends on convergence and fragility. The Akkadians could not see drought patterns beyond their rivers. The Maya could not model seismic stress. The Romans could not forecast solar minima, but we can. We can track drought across continents, monitor solar storms in real time, model tectonic stress, and map interconnections. Whether we use that awareness is another matter. The ruins of past civilizations are warnings carved in stone. They whisper that resets come not from one cause but from many. They remind us that fragility multiplies when systems interlock too tightly. And they hint at renewal, for life continued after each collapse. The Sumerians gave way to Babylonians, the Maya to successors, Rome to Byzantium, and then to Europe. Collapse ended arrangements, not humanity itself. What matters now is whether we will learn from these warnings, for the convergences described in myths and measured in data are reappearing. The auroras blaze farther south, quakes cluster in fragile regions, solar storms surge as Three-Eye Atlas drifts across the sky. History tells us cascades follow such alignments. Our task is to decide whether to meet them blindly or with awareness that memory itself is survival. If past civilizations fell through cascades, then what of us? Our networks are broader, our technologies finer, our resilience seemingly stronger. Yet fragility has not vanished. It has only changed form. In some ways, we are more exposed than any society before, because our interdependence is global and our systems are tightly coupled. What happened to Akkad or the Maya over decades might happen to us in months. To understand the coming reset, we must imagine how cascades would unfold now, not as myth, not as history, but as lived possibility. Consider the solar storm. Alone, a coronal mass ejection may only inconvenience. Satellites might reboot, auroras might blaze across unusual skies, radio channels might waver. But imagine this storm arriving in the midst of another stress. A major earthquake along a fault near a global port. Power grids already strained falter, internet backbones flicker, ships waiting to unload remain in harbour. Shortages ripple inland, a crisis that begins as light in the sky and tremor in the ground cascades into shortages, fear and unrest. This is the hallmark of cascades. They spread horizontally across domains. A geological jolt becomes an economic paralysis. A geomagnetic storm becomes political turmoil. Unlike past societies, our infrastructure is so interlinked that small disruptions magnify. A farmer in Mesopotamia could endure a poor harvest if his neighbour's field survived. A merchant in Rome could reroute trade if one road failed. But when satellites fail, the whole globe shudders. Modern examples foreshadow this fragility. In 1989, a geomagnetic storm knocked out power to Quebec for 9 hours. Millions lost electricity because currents induced in the grid cascaded through transformers. In 2011, an earthquake off Japan triggered not only tsunami devastation, but also nuclear meltdown and global supply chain disruption. In 2021, a blockage in the Suez Canal by a single container ship rippled through world trade, stalling billions in goods. These were not apocalypses, but they were rehearsals, reminders of how tightly bound our systems have become. Now overlay these events: a solar storm during a quake season, a trade disruption during a pandemic, a cyber attack during a blackout. Each possibility alone is survivable. Together they form a reset. This is the meaning of the Three-Eye Atlas effect. Not one cataclysm, but convergences that bend systems into cascade. Pause here and imagine a near future. A solar maximum sends auroras spilling across latitudes where children have never seen them. Social media is awash in photos, but also in rumours. Power surges, satellites flickering, flights delayed. Days later, a quake rattles a coastal city, damaging its port and cutting fibre optic cables that connect continents. Supply chains seize, grain prices spike, fear grows. Then Three-Eye Atlas brightens, its red coma vivid against the sky. To scientists, it is another interstellar visitor. To the public, it is an omen. Markets tremble, mistrust deepens. A crisis that began with lights in the sky spirals into cascading collapse. This is not fantasy, it is systems thinking applied to fragility. Each domain, climate, seismic, magnetic, technological, is a variable. Each can absorb stress, but convergence multiplies. The Bronze Age merchants waiting in empty ports did not know they were part of a cascade. Neither would we, at first. We would see only outages, shortages, delays. But the deeper pattern is amplification, the rhythm of collapse accelerating once enough dominoes have fallen. The fragility of our time is speed. Ancient collapses unfolded over decades, leaving survivors time to adapt. Today, a cascade could unfold in weeks. Markets move at digital speed. Misinformation spreads faster than truth. Supply chains depend on real-time coordination. The tighter the system, the sharper the unravelling when shocks converge. The past teaches us that collapse is rarely singular. The present warns us it may also be sudden. And yet, within this sobering reflection lies choice. For cascades are not destiny, they are conditions. Fragility amplifies shocks, but resilience can dampen them. Awareness of interdependence is the first step. To decentralize grids, diversify food sources, harden satellites. These are acts of recognition. They cannot erase convergence, but they can soften its blow. The Akkadians could not divert a mega-drought. The Maya could not reroute the rains. Rome could not foresee solar minima. But we can monitor, predict, prepare. Whether we will is another matter. Still, even preparation cannot erase uncertainty. For convergences are not predictable like eclipses. They are probabilistic, emergent, messy. What matters most is not prediction but perspective. To see ourselves not as invincible but as participants in cycles. In this perspective, resets are not total erasures but turning points. Civilizations collapse, but humanity continues. The form changes, the network shift, but memory persists. The challenge is that memory too can fail. Civilizations forget the lessons of fragility once stability returns. The Bronze Age survivors forgot the warnings of convergence and built fragile empires again. Rome's fall gave way to Europe's kingdoms, which themselves faced plague and famine. We too may forget unless we choose to inscribe memory deliberately, in archives, in stories, in systems built to endure. The Bugosphere of Columbia, if real, is one such inscription, an artifact that outlasted cycles. The myths of auroras and quakes are another. The question is whether we will create our own memory that outlasts collapse, or whether we will force our descendants to start again from fragments. So the Three-Eye Atlas effect is not only about physics or geology, it is about sociology, politics, and culture. It is about how fragility turns natural hazards into civilizational resets. It is about how convergences in the earth and sky echo through networks until they reshape lives. And it is about how awareness, fragile, fleeting, easily forgotten, may be our only shield. We cannot control when the auroras blaze, when the earth shakes, or when a comet appears. But we can control how tightly we bind our systems, how resiliently we prepare, how seriously we take the echoes of past collapses. The Bronze Age, the Maya, Rome, all whisper the same warning: beware convergence, for cascades follow. And now, with Three-Eye Atlas above us, the warning grows louder. Perhaps the true reset is not only collapse but recognition. Recognition that fragility is universal, that cycles turn, that memory matters. Recognition that convergences cannot be stopped, but their meaning can be transformed. For if we prepare, if we remember, then collapse may not be an end but a beginning, a shift toward resilience instead of oblivion. That is the choice before us, as the sky glows and the earth shakes once more. Will we repeat the cascades of the past, or will we heed their warnings and write a different story? If cascades unravel civilizations, then memory is what survives them. The ruins of Akkad, the abandoned cities of the Maya, the fractured empire of Rome, all are reminders that human systems fall, yet traces endure. Extinction is never absolute. It is always followed by renewal, always shadowed by memory. The question is not whether cycles return, but what we choose to carry across their thresholds. Earth itself is an archivist. In its ice, bubbles of ancient air remain. whispering of climates long past. In its stone, layers of iridium tell of asteroids, while rings of ash speak of volcanic winters. In its fossils, we see creatures that thrived until the cycle shifted. The planet remembers, even when species do not. We, arriving late to the story, are only beginning to learn how to read its memory. Ice cores, tree rings, sediments. Each is a page in a book that outlast empires. Yet humanity also remembers, though in ways more fragile and imaginative. Myths of floods, fires, and endless winters carry the resonance of disasters long past. They are not precise, but they endure. The story of Noah's Ark, the saga of Ragnarok, the Andean tales of sky serpents and quakes. These are not literal accounts, but metaphors carrying memory forward. They remind us that skies can grow strange, that the earth can convulse, that resets come. Even distorted, even reframed, they are survival in story form. In our age, we have added new forms of memory. We digitize knowledge, storing it in fragile servers. We etch golden records and fling them into the void aboard Voyager. We freeze seeds in Arctic vaults, archive genomes, map cultures and sprawling databases. Unlike myths, these are precise, yet they are fragile in their own way. A solar storm can wipe them. Rising seas can drown them. Wars can scatter them. Precision is not always resilience. This is why the Bugosphere unsettles us, not for what it is, but for what it represents. A metallic orb, seamless and enduring, surviving 12,000 years of silence. If real, it is proof that memory can be designed to outlast catastrophe. It is not a story told by descendants, nor a fossil read by scientists, but an artifact deliberately made to endure. Its makers, whoever they were, understood that survival requires not only living through disaster, but leaving something that speaks after disaster has passed. What will we leave? Skyscrapers will crumble, satellites will fall, digital archives will decay once power fails. Even books, if not tended, vanish in centuries. Perhaps fragments will endure, a stone carving, a piece of plastic fossilized in rock, a vault sealed in permafrost. But will they tell our story? Will they carry meaning? Or will they be read as curiosities, as we now read the orbs of Costa Rica, or the ruins of the Maya, fragments of a forgotten language? Perhaps the deepest survival is not biological at all. Perhaps it is archival. To be remembered is to continue, even if bodies perish. Memory is continuity, whether in stone, in story, or in steel. To build memory is to plant seeds across time. And if resets are inevitable, then planting seeds of memory may be the truest resilience. Pause here and imagine the future after a reset. The cities we know are gone, the grids dark, the satellites silent. Survivors live by rivers and forests, their knowledge diminished, their tools simple. Yet they tell stories of a sky that blazed red and green, of a star that wandered past and shook the world. They carve symbols, they light fires, they pass myths. Generations later, their descendants inherit not the satellites or skyscrapers, but the stories, and those stories shape how they rebuild. This is how memory becomes survival. It does not preserve everything, it preserves enough. Enough to remind the next cycle that resets are possible. Enough to give meaning to ruins. Enough to warn that the cosmos is not silent. And in this way, memory is not just a record. It is a compass. What then will our compass be? Will it be myths told in fragments? Will it be vaults buried in ice? Will it be artifacts built to endure beyond steel and silicon? Or will it be silence, leaving future peoples to guess? The choice is ours, though we rarely act as if it matters. We build for immediacy, not endurance. We archive for profit, not posterity. The Bugosphere, seamless and patient, is an accusation as much as an enigma. It shows us what we have not done, yet we still can. To build archives beyond fragility. to craft myths that carry meaning even when detail is lost, to inscribe our presence in forms designed to endure solar storms and quakes alike, to accept that resets come, but that memory can leap across them like a spark across darkness. The Three-Eye Atlas effect, unsettling as it is, reminds us of this responsibility. For as auroras spill across skies, as tremors ripple beneath cities, as myths echo with forgotten warnings, we are called to reflect not only on survival in the moment, but on survival in memory. What we leave may matter more than how long we last. The civilizations of the past left ruins, myths and echoes. The Earth itself left fossils and isotopes. We can leave more. We can leave intentional records, crafted with awareness that cycles turn. That is the gift of recognition. To see that endings are not erasures, but thresholds. To step across them carrying meaning forward. Perhaps this is the deeper meaning of the reset. Not only collapse, but the chance to inscribe. To say to the future, we were here, we saw the cycles, we remembered. And in that act, survival becomes something greater than endurance. It becomes participation in the larger rhythm of life and cosmos. If memory is survival, then reflection is its final form. To remember without reflecting is to carry echoes without meaning. But when echoes become contemplation, they transform into guidance. That is what myths once offered, what ruins still whisper, and what artifacts like the Bugosphere force us to confront. The chance to step outside the cycle, if only for a moment, by seeing it clearly. Human history has rarely granted such moments. The Akkadians did not know they were living through the collapse of the world's first empire. The Maya could not foresee that their calendars would outlast their cities. Rome did not imagine that its legions would become relics for tourists. They endured, suffered, rebuilt, but they did not see the cycle as cycle. They were inside it, unable to step beyond. We, however, live in a different time. We know of past extinctions, past collapses, past cascades. We hold their data and their myths together, and in doing so, we glimpse a wider rhythm. That glimpse is our chance. For awareness is where every true cycle of renewal begins. Awareness shifts collapse from meaningless destruction into remembered transformation. Awareness allows us to name fragility not as failure, but as condition. Awareness reframes resets not only as endings, but as invitations to begin again with memory intact. Without awareness, collapse erases. With awareness, it inscribes. This is perhaps the truest message of the Three-Eye Atlas effect. Its convergences may shatter grids, silence satellites, rattle cities. Its auroras may blaze like dragons above us. Its tremors may remind us of giants stirring below. But its deeper effect is not physical at all. It is cognitive. It forces us to see fragility, to confront cycles, to recognize patterns that civilizations before us only remembered in myth. It calls us not only to endure, but to reflect. Reflection does not spare us from collapse. The Akkadians knew drought, the Maya knew hunger, Rome knew plague and invasion. We may know all these again. But reflection changes what collapse means. It allows us to see continuity where once there was only loss. It allows us to plant memory deliberately, to craft myths consciously, to archive not by accident but by design. In this sense, reflection is resilience, not of systems which always break, but of meaning which can endure. Pause here and imagine a lone observer centuries from now standing where a city once thrived. Around them are ruins reclaimed by vines, skies lit by auroras, earth trembling with hidden power. They hold in their hands not our technologies, long gone, but a story. Perhaps it is carved into stone, perhaps it is whispered by generations, perhaps it is embedded in an artifact that survived. Whatever its form, it tells them that the cycle has turned before and will turn again. That awareness alone may guide them forward, just as myths guided our ancestors, and just as data guides us now. in that vision lies our responsibility to bequeath memory, not only to survive, to leave not only ruins but echoes that can be read, whether by our descendants, by strangers, or by minds we cannot yet imagine. The bug sphere does this in silence. The myths do this in metaphor. We can do this in archives, in art, in intention. For survival is not measured only by years endured, but by meaning carried forward. And so the countdown is not only to collapse, it is to recognition, to responsibility, to the possibility of rebuilding not in defiance of the cosmos, but in rhythm with it. The Atlas effect may break grids, silence satellites, and topple cities, but it also opens a door, one civilizations before us never had the chance to see so clearly. For in this reset, we are witnesses not only to destruction, but to the patterns that bind us to stars, stones, and stories alike. Three-Eye Atlas will pass, the auroras will fade, the tremors will quiet though never end. What will remain is the memory of the reset etched into culture, myth, and history. And in that memory lies the choice of how to step forward. The Three-Eye Atlas effect is not just about what happens when cycles converge, it is about what happens when humanity is forced to confront that convergence. And the answer, as always, will not be written in the skies but in us. Perhaps that is the final meaning, that we are both fragile and luminous, both temporary and enduring, that silence is not emptiness but design, that absence is not abandonment but invitation, and that every cycle, however destructive, is also an opportunity to inscribe memory that carries across the darkness into the next dawn.